In the aftermath of the greatest catastrophe ever recorded, the Great Flood, a patriarch plants a vineyard, drinks of its wine, and collapses naked in his tent. His son enters, looks upon him, and commits an act so terrible that when the father awakens, he curses not his son, but his grandson to eternal servitude. This mysterious episode from Genesis 9 has perplexed and disturbed readers for millennia. What exactly did Ham do to his father Noah that merited such a devastating curse? Why was Canaan cursed for his father's sin? And why does the biblical text shroud the incident in such ambiguity? The answers may lie not only within the biblical text itself, but in the ancient mythological landscape of the Near East and the Mediterranean. Stories of divine castrations, sexual usurpations, and generational conflicts that echo across cultures. In this video, we peel back the layers of euphemism to reveal how the strange tale of Noah's nakedness draws from a vast reservoir of mythic parallels, from the castration of sky gods in Greek and Hittite myth, to the drunken exposure of Canaanite deities, to the sexual power struggles of Egyptian pantheons, all converge in this brief, cryptic biblical narrative that fundamentally shaped how Western civilization came to understand power, sexuality, and succession. What we will discover is not a simple case of literary borrowing, but a profound transformation. How ancient Israel's monotheistic revolution took these raw mythic materials and forged something revolutionary, a moral tale about familial respect, divine order, and the fate of nations. The story itself occupies just 7 verses in Genesis 9, 20 through 27. After the floodwaters recede, Noah, previously described as righteous in his generation, plants a vineyard, produces wine, and becomes drunk. He lies uncovered, naked in his tent. His son Ham, the father of Canaan, sees Noah's nakedness and tells his 2 brothers outside. These brothers, Shem and Japheth, take a garment and, walking backward with averted eyes, cover their father's exposed body. When Noah awakes and somehow knows what his youngest son had done to him, his response is severe. He utters a curse not on Ham himself, but on Ham's son Canaan. Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be to his brothers. Noah then blesses Shem and Japheth, declaring Canaan will be their servant. This sparse account raises troubling questions. How did Noah know what happened to him while he was unconscious? What exactly did Ham do beyond merely seeing his father naked? Why curse Canaan rather than Ham? And why is the punishment so extraordinarily harsh if the crime was simply viewing a parent's nakedness? The text's reticence to specify the offense has generated countless interpretations throughout history. Yet the severity of Noah's reaction, along with crucial linguistic clues in the Hebrew text, suggests something far more transgressive occurred in that tent. The phrase, saw his father's nakedness, might seem straightforward to modern readers, but in the cultural and linguistic context of the ancient Near East, this phrasing carried ominous undertones. Throughout Leviticus, to uncover nakedness functions as a standard euphemism for sexual intercourse. Leviticus 20:17 explicitly equates seeing nakedness with sexual activity. When Noah later awakens and knew what his youngest son had done to him, the Hebrew emphasizes an action performed upon Noah, not merely a passive observation. 4 primary interpretations have emerged from scholarly and traditional sources. The voyeurism theory. At minimum, Ham gravely dishonored his father by gazing upon his nakedness and then publicizing it. It's a serious breach of familial piety in patriarchal society. Rather than discreetly covering Noah like his brothers did, Ham mocked and exposed his father's vulnerability. Ancient Near Eastern culture held that seeing a patriarch's genitals was taboo, potentially warranting severe punishment. There's also the paternal rape theory. Many scholars believe Ham sexually violated his unconscious father. The Babylonian Talmud records this interpretation. One said Ham castrated him, and one said he sodomized him. The text's emphasis that Noah knew what was done to him suggests physical evidence of an assault, not merely a disrespectful glance. Then there's the castration theory. An interpretation dating back to ancient rabbinic sources holds that Ham castrated Noah to prevent him from having more sons who might dilute Ham's inheritance. This would explain why Noah has no more children despite living 350 years after the flood, and why Noah retaliates by cursing Ham's lineage through Canaan. The maternal incest theory. Some modern scholars argue that seeing his father's nakedness was a euphemism for having sex with Noah's wife, Ham's own mother. Leviticus 18, 7-8 states, "The nakedness of your father is the nakedness of your mother." In this view, Canaan may have been the product of this forbidden union, explaining why Noah specifically cursed him. These interpretations share a common thread. All view Ham's act as an attempt to usurp patriarchal authority, whether through sexual domination, preventing further offspring, or appropriating the patriarch's reproductive rights. And all explain why the offense warranted a curse on Ham's lineage. The biblical story doesn't exist in isolation. It emerges from a cultural landscape rich with familiar or similar tales of generational conflict, sexual violation, and succession struggles. The most striking mythological parallel comes from Greek mythology. In Hesiod's theogony, the sky god Uranus, or Uranos, continually forces his offspring back into the womb of Gaia, Earth, Mother Earth. His youngest son, the Titan Cronus, ambushes his father with a sickle and brutally castrates him, casting the severed genitals into the sea. The parallels are actually quite remarkable. A father is rendered powerless during an act related to reproduction, Uranos through castration, Noah through drunkenness. A son commits a transgressive act against the father's generative power, and consequences echo through generations. Uranos curses Cronus, prophesying that Cronus' own son will overthrow him, a prophecy fulfilled when Zeus deposes his father. But the most astonishing connection lies in the names themselves. One of Cronus' brothers was the Titan Iapetus, a name virtually identical to Noah's son Japheth, Hebrew Yefeth. This linguistic parallel is what scholar Philip Wagenbaum calls a textual fingerprint, linking these narratives. The Genesis text even includes a deliberate wordplay. Noah declares Yepha Elohim, Yephet, may God enlarge Japheth, echoing Greek etymologies of Iapetus' name that suggest expansion or enlargement. The connections go deeper still. In Genesis, Japheth fathers a son named Javan, the Hebrew word for Greeks or Ionians. In Greek mythology, Iapetus' lineage leads to Ion, ancestor of the Ionians, through his grandson Deucalion. This cannot be coincidental. As scholar Bruce Loudon notes, Iapetus' status as a god in Homer and Hesiod, but Japheth's mortal status in Genesis, should be understood as an instance of Old Testament myth's tendency to euhemerize divine characters from other traditions. The flood narrative itself provides another link. Iapetus was grandfather to Deucalion, the great Noah who survives a great flood by building an ark on the advice of his father Prometheus. Thus, Iapetus connects both flood survival and father-son conflict, just as Japheth links to both Noah's flood and Ham's transgression. In both traditions, the world is divided among brothers following a patriarch's humiliation. After Cronus' overthrow, his son Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades draw lots to divide the cosmos, heaven sea and underworld. Similarly, Noah's sons become progenitors of the world's peoples. Shem of Semites, Ham of Africans and Canaanites, Japheth of Indo-Europeans, effectively dividing heaven and earth among them. Remarkably, ancient Jewish writers explicitly recognized these parallels. The third Sibylline oracle, a Hellenistic Jewish text, identifies Noah's three sons as Cronus, Titan, and Iapetus, the best sons of Ouranos and Gaia, directly mapping the Titan trio onto biblical figures. This ancient text presents a history where after the flood, the world was divided among the sons of a deity, blending Greek and biblical chronologies with striking transparency. These parallels strengthen the castration interpretation of Ham's deed. The Genesis author, likely familiar with Greek myth, either directly or through Near Eastern intermediaries, transformed the cosmic generational struggle into a human family drama, demythologizing, if you will, or demythologized, but preserving its essential pattern. The Greek myth itself derives from much earlier Near Eastern sources. The Hurrian tale of Kumarbi and Anu, preserved in Hittite text from the Late Bronze Age, around 1400 to 1200 BCE, presents what scholars recognize as the original version of this divine succession drama. In this ancient myth, known as the Song of Kingship or the Kumarbi cycle, the god Kumarbi rebels against his father Anu, the sky god. Unlike Cronus's clean slice with a sickle, Kumarbi's attack is more visceral and intimate. He bites off his father's genitals and swallows them. What follows is particularly telling. Anu, despite his pain, laughs momentarily before pronouncing a curse on Kumarbi, declaring that his son has unwittingly consumed the seed that will impregnate him with several deities, including the storm god Teshub, who will eventually overthrow him. As prophesied, Kumarbi later gives birth, through spitting or through his body, to these divine children, and Teshub indeed rises to become the new king of heaven. The parallels to Noah's story are even more resonant with this older myth. Both narratives share the crucial themes of family overthrowing through sexual violation and a father's curse that ensures the transgressor's triumph will be short-lived. The Hittite text specifically emphasizes Kumarbi's reaction. He rejoiced and laughed after his attack, only to have his celebration cut short by Anu's ominous prophecy. While Genesis doesn't explicitly describe Ham laughing, later interpreters frequently portrayed him as deriving perverse pleasure from his father's humiliation, making the parallel even stronger. Perhaps most striking is the linguistic echo between the myths. The Hittite text employs language of laughing and cursing that closely mirrors the Noah scene. Kumarbi's rejoicing is answered by Anu's curse for his deed. The interplay between seeing or touching genitals and a subsequent curse forms the core pattern in both narratives. In one, Kumarbi literally takes his father's genitals into his mouth. In the other, Ham sees his father's nakedness. Both acts represent a grave violation of patriarchal sexuality, swiftly followed by a curse that reverberates through generations. A critical difference emerges in the outcome, however. In both the Greek and Hurrian versions, the usurping son Cronus, or Kumarbi, succeeds temporarily in his rebellion. But in Genesis, Ham gains absolutely nothing from his transgression. His rebellion is immediately quashed by Noah's curse. This transformation reveals the biblical author's moral framework. In a monotheistic, patriarchal worldview, the father figure cannot be overthrown, even briefly. Where pagan myths present succession as a natural, if violent, cosmic cycle, Genesis reframes it as a moral lesson about family impiety. Ham receives no reward, only punishment. As scholar Bernard Lang aptly observed, Genesis 9 reads like a prudently expurgated myth. The explicit sexual violence of the Kumarbi Cronus myths is veiled in euphemism, Noah's nakedness is mentioned, but the narrative remains deliberately coy about Ham's precise actions. Nevertheless, the skeleton of the ancient succession myth remains intact. A patriarch is emasculated or humiliated, and the perpetrator's lineage suffers the consequences through a prophetic curse. From ancient Ugarit, a Canaanite city that flourished between the 14th and 13th centuries BCE, come two narratives that illuminate the Noah story with startling clarity. These texts, written in the very region that would later become the Promised Land of Israel, provide crucial cultural context for understanding Noah's drunkenness and Ham's transgression. The first text, designated KTU 1:114, presents the Canaanite high god El hosting a marzia, a ritual drinking banquet. What follows is perhaps the most graphic description of divine intoxication in ancient literature. The tablet vividly relates El drinks wine until he is drunk. El staggers to his house. El collapses like a dead man in his own excrement and urine. This unidentified portrayal of the chief deity reduces to a helpless, soiled state bears an unmistakable resemblance to Noah, sprawled uncovered in his tent. What happens next, however, creates a telling contrast with Genesis. El's sons, the gods Thukamuna and Shunama, dutifully carry their incapacitated father home. The goddesses Anat and Asherah prepare a medicinal remedy for him, including what modern readers would recognize as a hair of the dog hangover cure. El eventually awakens, restored to his dignity by his respectful divine family. This Ugaritic episode provides the perfect foil to the Genesis account. Shem and Japheth's behavior, covering their father while averting their eyes, mirrors what El's good sons do. But Genesis introduces a third reaction through Ham: exploitation rather than reverence. Genesis thus engages the familiar trope of the drunken patriarch, but with a crucial twist, showing two opposing responses and their consequences. In Ugarit, the father recovers with family support. In Genesis, the father awakens to pronounce a curse. The parallel is strengthened by the cultural proximity. The Marzia ritual drinking assembly appears elsewhere in the Hebrew Bible. Amos 6:7, suggesting Israelite familiarity with this Canaanite institution. Moreover, El was a deity the early Israelites would have recognized, as aspects of El were absorbed into the conception of Yahweh. The Genesis author seems to deliberately invert the Ugaritic paradigm. See how Cain, Ham did not act like El's good sons, and behold the consequences. The second Ugaritic narrative, the Epic of the King Kurta, provides a human parallel that further illuminates Noah's curse. This royal tale recounts how King Kurta falls gravely ill, becoming temporarily incapacitated. During this vulnerability, his eldest son Yasib, or Yasibu, seizes authority. When Kurta recovers through divine intervention, he discovers Yasib is unwilling to relinquish the throne. In response, the restored monarch unleashes a vehement curse upon his son, declaring Yasib will have no heir, effectively terminating his dynastic line. This parallel is striking. A son exploits a father's vulnerability, illness for Kurta, drunkenness for Noah, attempts to usurp patriarchal authority, and receives a curse that affects his posterity. Both curses share a common theme: the loss of legacy. Kurta condemns Yasib to have no heir, while Noah condemns Ham's lineage through Canaan to perpetual slavery or servitude. Intriguingly, while Yasib's motive is explicitly political, seizing the throne, Genesis remains ambiguous about Ham's intent. Yet, certain interpretations, particularly the maternal incest theory, suggest Ham too sought to usurp Noah's position as patriarch, potentially by impregnating Noah's wife or preventing Noah from having a fourth son. A tantalizing clue appears in Genesis Rabbah, which puts these words in Ham's mouth: "Our father has 3 sons and still seeks a fourth." This implies the same motive as Yasib's impatience for inheritance, the desire for the sons to possess the world for themselves. One crucial distinction emerges in the divine dimension. In the Kurta epic, the god El actually supports the king's future, suggesting his dynasty will continue despite Yasib's rebellion. By contrast, while God had blessed Noah's sons to be fruitful and multiply, he never explicitly endorses Noah's curse on Canaan. Unlike other patriarchal pronouncements in Genesis, Noah's curse is not presented as divinely ordained. It may reflect personal rage rather than divine decree. Nevertheless, later biblical history treats this curse as effective, justifying Canaan's subjugation to Israel. What emerges is a pattern. Genesis 9 appears to synthesize these two Canaanite motifs, combining the drunken dignity of El with the paternal curse of Kurta to create a narrative that explains Israel's dominance over Canaan in moral terms. The people who would inhabit the very land where these myths originated are portrayed as justly subservient due to an ancient violation of patriarchal honor. The context of Canaan made by the Kurta parallel, a curse resulting in lost legacy, particularly resonate for biblical authors crafting an origin story that legitimized Israelite conquest. Ancient Egyptian mythology provides an even more explicit lens through which to view Ham's transgression. In the tale of the contention of Horus and Seth, preserved in the Chester Beatty Papyrus from Egypt's 20th dynasty, roughly 1186 to 1069 BCE, we find a royal succession dispute that turns on sexual domination. After Osiris's murder, his son Horus and brother Seth vie for the Egyptian throne. In one particularly shocking episode, Seth attempts to sexually dominate his nephew through homosexual assault. The papyrus relates how Seth invites Horus to sleep in his house, then during the night places his phallus between Horus's thighs and ejaculates. Seth's explicit aim is to feminize and humiliate Horus, to render him unfit for kingship by sexually subordinating him. What happens next is even more revealing. Horus, forewarned by his mother Isis, catches Seth's semen in his hands. Later, with Isis's help, he retaliates by tricking Seth into consuming lettuce smeared with Horus's own semen. When the tribunal of the gods convenes to settle their dispute, the semen inside each deity speaks or is revealed. The discovery that Seth has unwittingly ingested Horus's seed, effectively being impregnated by him, leads to Seth's complete humiliation. The gods laugh at him, and Horus is awarded the throne. While this conflict involves uncle and nephew rather than father and son, the parallels to Noah's story are striking. Both involve 1. Sexual exploitation during a vulnerable state. Horus while sleeping, Noah while drunk or unconscious. 2. An attempt to use sexuality to avert dominance or usurp authority. 3. The crucial role of semen as evidence in Egypt, or potentially as proof in Ham's case, if he sexually violated Noah. 4. Most remarkably, both tales end with the transgressor's plan backfiring spectacularly. In the Egyptian myth, Seth, who attempted to sexually dominate, is himself sexually humiliated. In Genesis, Ham, who sought to shame his father, sees his own lineage shamed through Noah's curse. Both narratives share the motif of role reversal. The would-be dominator becomes the dominated. The Egyptian parallel illuminates why interpreters have often read Ham's act as a sexual transgression. In the ancient Near East, sexual domination was understood as a pathway to power. If Ham saw or uncovered his father's nakedness in a sexual manner, he would have been following a recognized cultural pattern of attempting to supplant authority through sexual means. Whether Ham raped Noah, castrated him, or took his wife, any such act would resonate with this ancient understanding of sexuality as a vehicle for asserting dominance. From ancient Persia comes another compelling parallel, the legend of Zahak, Azi-Dahaka, preserved in Ferdowsi's epic, Shahnameh, but drawing on much older Zoroastrian traditions. In this tale, Zahak is seduced by the evil spirit Engramanu, Ahriman, into committing the ultimate act of filial betrayal, patricide. Zahak's father, Murtus, is portrayed as a just and righteous king, much like Noah is described as righteous in his generation. Yet, Zahak, consumed by ambition, digs a pit in his father's garden path, causing Murtus to fall to his death. Zahak then usurps the throne, beginning a 1,000-year reign of terror. His patricide is soon marked upon his body. 2 serpents grow from his shoulders, demanding to be fed human brains, a visible curse manifesting his inner corruption. Eventually, the hero Hurrian overthrows Zahak and chains him beneath Mount Damavand, where he remains imprisoned to this day. Like Ham's lineage through Canaan, Zahak's legacy is one of perpetual subjugation. While lacking the sexual element of Noah's story, the Persian legend highlights another aspect. Just as Ham's offense against Noah results in Canaan's curse, Zahak's crime against his father Murtus results in both personal damnation and suffering for his subjects. Both narratives affirm that violence against patriarchal authority, whether sexual or physical, brings lasting consequences. The Persian tradition also offers a fascinating structural parallel. In the Shahnameh, the hero Hurrian divides the world among his 3 sons, Salm, Tur, and Iraj. This tripartite division of the known world mirrors how Noah's 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, become progenitors of distinct peoples and territories. In the Persian conflict, the elder brothers murder the youngest, triggering generations of vengeance. In Genesis, Ham's transgression creates an eternal hierarchy among the brothers' descendants. Zoroastrian thought, like biblical theology, contained the concept that a father's curse could doom a son's lineage. While emphasizing individual moral responsibility, Persian religious texts acknowledged that ancestral sins could affect descendants, parallel to the biblical notion that the iniquity of the fathers is visited upon the children. Exodus 20, verse 5. The Persian connection extends even to nomenclature. Medieval legends associated Japheth, with the ancestry of many Eurasian peoples, including Persians. Thus, the world of ancient Iran may have shared more than just mythic themes with the biblical narrative. It may have claimed kinship with one of Noah's blessed sons. Across the ancient world, from Mesopotamia to Greece, from Canaan to Egypt and Persia, we see the same fundamental narrative elements repeating with remarkable consistency. First, a patriarchal figure's vulnerability, whether through drunkenness with Noah and El, unconsciousness with Horus, illness with Kurta, sexual exposure by Ernos, or trust in the Anu and Murtus stories. Each myth begins with a father or authority figure rendered temporarily defenseless. Second, across these ancient myths, one striking motif echoes with uncanny consistency. The family offender, a son or subordinate figure, rises against the patriarch, committing an act of profound violation. Ham dishonors his father Noah, Cronus mutilates Uranos, Kumarbi bites off Anu's genitals, Yasib rebels against Kurta, Seth seeks to sexually dominate Horus, Zahak murders Murtus. Though the expressions vary, ranging from sexual assault to outright patricide, the core narrative is the same. A younger generation transgresses the sacred boundary of authority, triggering a curse that reshapes dynasties. This universal pattern reveals an ancient anxiety about power, inheritance, and the chaos unleashed when the natural order is inverted. Third, a transgressive act by a son or subordinate. In the Greek and Hurrian myths, this violation is explicitly sexual and violent castration. In the Egyptian case, it's attempted sexual domination. In the Persian tradition, it's outright murder. The biblical account of Ham's deed remains deliberately ambiguous, yet hints at comparable gravity. Fourth, a moment of discovery or awareness. The patriarch awakens, recovers, or somehow perceives the violation. Noah knew what his youngest son had done to him. Anu immediately recognizes Kumarbi's treachery. Kurta perceives Yasib's usurpation. The gods discover Seth's humiliation through revealing semen. Fifth, a curse or judgment pronounced. In nearly every case, the offender faces a severe pronouncement that affects not just himself but his lineage. Noah curses Canaan. Ouranos foretells Cronus' overthrow. Anu curses Kumarbi to bear his own usurper. Kurta wishes death upon Yasib. And finally, the diminishment of the offender's line. In all cases, the transgressor's descendants suffer a reduced status. Canaan becomes a servant. Cronus is imprisoned in Tartarus. Kumarbi's rule is short-lived. Yasib loses his inheritance. Seth's claim to the throne is delegitimized. Zahak is eternally chained and produces no heirs. What this visual comparison reveals is not just similarity, but a progression. The Hurrian and Hittite myth, 1400 BCE, predates Hesiod's Greek version, 700 BCE, which in turn influenced later Greek writers. The Ugaritic tablets containing El's drunkenness and Kurta's curse from 1400 to 1200 BCE emerged from the very region that would later become the Promised Land of Israel. This suggests a transmission of mythic patterns across time and geography. Notice how these myths cluster geographically. The most explicit sexual violation appears in Mesopotamia and Greece. Canaan provides the drunken patriarch motif. Egypt contributes sexual humiliation as political disqualification. Persia adds extreme family betrayal leading to cosmic punishment. The Genesis author, positioned at the crossroads of these traditions, appears to have deliberately synthesized elements from surrounding cultures, transforming them through the lens of monotheism and Israel's unique theological vision. Even the names themselves form a revelatory pattern. Japheth echoes Iapetus, not just phonetically, but etymologically, both connected to the concept of expansion and enlargement. Ham resonates with Egyptian concepts of heat or redness, qualities associated with the god Seth and Shem, meaning name or renown, receives the blessing of God whose name in Hebrew tradition would become too sacred to pronounce. This visual mapping confirms what detailed analysis has suggested. The story of Noah's nakedness is not an isolated biblical curiosity. It is instead a carefully crafted transformation of ancient mythic patterns, repurposed to teach moral lessons about family honor, divine order, and the theological underpinnings of Israel's relationship to neighboring peoples. What other cultures portrayed as cosmic drama or royal succession, Genesis reframed as a family ethical narrative with profound moral implications. The biblical author did not invent this story from nothing, but rather brilliantly adapted cultural material that would have resonated with ancient audiences, infusing it with monotheistic meaning and ethical purpose. What emerges from this comparative analysis is remarkable. The biblical author appears to have drawn from a wide spread of ancient myth theme. A patriarch is rendered vulnerable, a son violates him, often sexually, and generational consequences follow. But the Genesis version contains crucial transformations. First, the cosmic becomes historical. Instead of battling gods, we have a human family after the flood. Second, the moral dimension is emphasized. While pagan myths present succession as natural, if violent, Genesis portrays Ham's act as a grave sin deserving punishment. Third, the curse becomes prophetic rather than magical. Noah's words justify later historical realities, Israel's subjugation of Canaan within a moral framework. Most significantly in pagan myths, the usurping son often succeeds temporarily. Cronus rules for a time. Kumarbi briefly claims kingship, but in Genesis, Ham gains nothing. His rebellion is immediately thwarted through Noah's curse. The biblical narrative thus rejects the cyclical pattern of overthrow and upheaval, instead affirming stability in the divinely ordained order. This brief enigmatic tale of a drunken patriarch and his son's transgression has reverberated across millennia, generating interpretations as diverse as the cultures that encountered it. As we conclude our exploration, we must ask, what did later generations make of this mysterious incident, and what might it truly mean? During the Second Temple period, 4th century BCE to 1st century CE, Jewish commentators struggled to make sense of this troubling narrative. The Book of Jubilees, written around the 2nd century BCE, suddenly transforms the story, portraying Noah's winemaking as proper ritual observance, waiting years, offering firstfruits, to excuse his drunkenness as non-sinful. More strikingly, Jubilees provides an entirely new justification for Canaan's curse. After the flood, Noah divides the earth among his sons, but Canaan violates the boundary by settling in the land promised to Shem. Thus, Jubilee shifts the curse from Ham's original transgression to Canaan's later territorial disobedience, a significant reframing that speaks to ancient anxieties about justifying Israel's conquest of Canaan. The Dead Sea Scrolls from Qumran offer another perspective. One fragmentary text, 4Q252, explains that since God had blessed Noah's sons, Noah could not curse Ham directly and so cursed Canaan instead. This reflects a concern for theological consistency. Divine blessing cannot be contradicted even by a patriarch's curse. Perhaps most astonishing is the Third Sibylline Oracle, around 150 BCE, which explicitly identifies Noah's three sons as Cronus, Titan, and Iapetus, the best of the sons of Ouranos and Gaia. This Hellenistic Jewish text openly acknowledges the connection between biblical patriarchs and Greek titans, suggesting ancient readers recognize these mythic resonances. By implicitly equating Ham with Cronus, the castrator, it hints at a scandalous understanding of Ham's deed without stating it directly. The Alexandrian philosopher Philo, 1st century, took a different approach, allegorizing the entire episode. For him, Noah's drunkenness symbolized the mind's susceptibility to pleasure, while Ham represented the dissipative vice that mocks virtue when it falters. In Philo's reading, the curse means that vice, Ham, will always be subservient to virtue, Shem and Japheth, transforming a disturbing family drama into a moral allegory about the soul. Flavius Josephus, writing in the late 1st century, offered a more literal interpretation. He described Ham as having laughed at Noah and shown his shame to his brothers, framing the offense as mockery and disrespect rather than sexual violation. For Josephus, the curse fell on Canaan because Ham himself was protected by God's prior blessing, and Noah forgave the injury done to himself while still requiring justice for the offense. What we witness across these interpretations is a consistent struggle to sanitize the narrative, to downplay sexual elements, rationalize the curse, and extract moral lessons. Yet alongside the sanitization runs a parallel thread of acknowledgement that something profoundly transgressive occurred in that tent, something that echoed darker myths from surrounding cultures. The Noah's nakedness story reveals itself as a text operating simultaneously on multiple levels. As a family drama, it warns of the dire consequences that follow from violating sacred bonds between father and son. The punishment extends beyond the transgressor to future generations, a sobering reminder that moral failures reverberate through time. As political allegory, it establishes legitimate hierarchy. The younger, Ham, must not usurp the elder, Noah, lest he and his line be consigned to subjugation. This reinforces ancient values of patriarchal authority and proper succession. As ethic ideology, it provides an origin story for Israel's dominance over Canaan. By attributing Canaanite subordination to an ancient moral failing, it transforms political reality into divine justice. As theological parable, it demonstrates that even after the cleansing flood, humanity's sinful nature persists, whether through sexual impropriety, family disrespect, or attempted usurpation. The New World Order established after the deluge remains vulnerable to human failing. Most remarkably, as transformed myth, it reflects Israel's monotheistic revolution. The cosmic battles for supremacy found in pagan myths become human family drama. Divine castration becomes ambiguous nakedness. Succession by violence becomes curse and moral judgment. What in other cultures played out as amoral cosmic cycles becomes in Genesis a moral lesson about respect, boundaries, and divine order. What truly happened in Noah's tent? The text's deliberate ambiguity invites us to consider the range of possibilities, from mere disrespect to sexual violation to attempted usurpation of patriarchal status. Perhaps this ambiguity itself is the point. By veiling the specific nature of Ham's transgression, Genesis forces us to contemplate the boundaries of proper behavior and the sanctity of family relationships without becoming fixated on lurid details. The brevity of the account belies its astonishing depth. In just 7 verses, Genesis 9, 20-27 manages to transform ancient mythic patterns into ethical teaching, historical explanation, and theological statement. It shows Noah, the righteous man who saved humanity in a moment of human weakness, but focuses our attention not on his failing, but on his son's divergent responses. How we react to others' vulnerability, the text suggests, reveals our true character. The outcome reverberates through history. Canaan falls under a curse, while Shem and Japheth receive blessing. In biblical ideology, moral behavior shapes destinies. A single act of disrespect can echo through generations, while reverence can secure lasting favor. Ultimately, this cryptic episode stands as a powerful testament to the Bible's transformative genius. It takes raw mythic material common to the ancient world and refashions it into something profoundly different. A story that no longer upholds reverence, respect, and proper order under the sovereignty of a single God. The nakedness of Noah thus remains both revealed and concealed, a narrative whose surface simplicity masks astonishing complexity, whose ancient resonances speak to eternal human truths, and whose mysterious core continues to challenge, disturb, and enlighten us across the millennia.